Hi, everybody. What's up? You're watching Sit Down. I'm DJ Sixsmith. Brand new book right here. It is called The Upswing, How America Came Together a Century Ago and How We Could Do It Again. Robert Putnam, Shaylyn Romney Garrett. How are you both doing today?
Terrific.
Great.
It's
Happy
good
to be with you.
you.
It's really nice to have both of you on. Bob, why don't we start with you? You're somebody who has studied political science for a long time. You've written many books. I read a little bit of Bowling Alone, I was telling you before. What was it like jumping into this project, and why write a book like this now?
Well, Shaylyn and I have been working together for many years, actually. We're obviously, and I think it's obvious, she's a lot younger than me. Shaylyn was originally a student of mine about, 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And we've been close ever since. We are both interested in how America got into a pickle. We're in a real pickle at the moment. And probably every viewer, no matter what their political views, thinks it doesn't get any worse than this. America is in a real crisis. And Shaylyn and I were interested not only in how we got there, but what we could do to get out of there. And so from our point of view, and I think this is not controversial, actually, in a time in which everything else is controversial, America has hardly been in worse shape than we are now. And we are more polarized politically than we have almost ever been. We're more unequal economically, actually, than we have almost ever been. We're more socially fragmented almost than we have almost ever been. And we're also more focused on ourselves, more inward focuses rather than on community, more than we ever been before. And if you follow that, and most accounts that you hear nowadays about our plight begin over the last 30 or 40 years, and they describe how we got to this stage. And they end up with a very pessimistic outlook on what's been happening in America. We have a somewhat different take because we go back not just 50 or 60 years, but 125 years. And what we find 125 years ago, it was called the Gilded Age, and it was a period of extreme inequality, extreme political polarization, extreme social fragmentation, and extreme self-centeredness. And if that sounds a little familiar, it is familiar. And what we describe is, beginning 125 years ago to now, a big U-shaped curve in which we started off very focused on the I, and over the first 60 or 70 years after that, up until the 1970s about, we have become more of a we, more equal, more connected, less polarized. And then over the last 60 or 70 years, this is the part of the story everybody else notices, we've been getting worse. But if you begin back at that earlier period, I think, Shaylyn, don't we agree that back there, it's a much more optimistic outlook. It leads you to hope and not to despair. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really important to have some hope. And Shaylyn, I'll bring you in here. I think it's really fascinating, everything that Bob just mentioned, and also how you both just zoom out for 125 years here. So what was most fascinating to you as you start digging through everything here?
You know, I've been an enthusiast of the progressive era for a long time. And the progressive era is the era that came on the heels of the Gilded Age, right? So it was really the progressive era in which we saw a very concerned group of reformers grab the reins of American history and say, we're not going to be in this mess any longer. We are going to right the ship, and we're going to pull up out of this upswing. And I don't know if they even really knew it at the time, but with the benefit of this 125-year lens, we really see the way in which they engineered a vast, multifaceted, very clear upswing in our nation's history that lasted really 2/3 of a century. And so for me, the question is, how do we look to their example, and what do we learn from them that we might be able to apply today? Now, of course, some of the issues that they were dealing with were different back then. A lot of them were really similar, though, actually. And so we know things are going to look a bit different, but are there broad lessons that we can learn from the progressive era and apply today? And, maybe I could just touch on a few of those lessons. So the first, I think that is fascinating to me is that the progressives were engaged in a very clear project of moral awakening. They were not just saying, hey, inequality is a bad thing for everyone because it's bad for our economy. They were saying, inequality is contrary to our primary conceptions as a nation in terms of shared equality, shared prosperity. They were asking themselves as well how many of these reformers were members of an elite class, right? Educated, middle-class Americans. They were asking how they were complicit in the problems that they were seeing around them, not just pointing the finger at the idle rich or some similar thing. They also engaged in a vast foment of citizen innovation. Instead of saying, hey, you know what we really need is a national leader to come along and save us, they said to themselves, there are problems right outside my doorstep. I can begin to solve them. They did so, and then some of the solutions that they created bubbled up to the municipal level and then to the state level, and ultimately became blueprints for vast national changes that really shaped the America that we know today.
You bring up a lot of really interesting points there, not just focusing on one person. The collective effort of people working together is something that we've really lost sight of. So Bob, I'll bring you back in here. We've gone from me to we, back to me. How do we become more of a community, and how do we focus on things outside of ourselves when it feels like there's so many different distractions? And like you said, there are so many reasons to be pessimistic at this moment.
Yeah, I think there are other lessons back from that period. Again, as Shaylyn said, we're not trying to say that the content of what people did back there was the right solution, but we're saying the strategy that they used is really, we can learn a lot from that. And one that was already mentioned that will be familiar today is it's very clear that the leader back there, I mean, the top political leadership did not cause this. Charismatic leadership was not what was needed. And if you think that that's a reference to today, I won't, that is, if you think there are people around today who think that they're the charismatic leadership and they're going to solve the problem, I don't want to get political here, but there is a certain similarity between the lesson, I mean, the lesson we learned from the last time is don't wait around for a charismatic leader. That's not the way to go. A related point that Shaylyn was talking about was this process was very decentralized, very decentralized. I'm talking about then. Because the national level was so blocked politically, and the country was so polarized politically, where did you start? You started with ordinary people in ordinary towns and cities across America, not Harvard, not the West Coast, not Washington, but just ordinary people in, East Elbow, Iowa. I'm making up the name of it. It was places you never heard of.